Oh, literally, I can peel this stuff off this head for now because I'm like, It's not looking too bad. Yeah, I thought Cameron was switching. Didn't he say he was going to switch? Or he had thought about it. How do I have to look here on the computer? Of course, my batteries run away. Thank you, Dad. So, what is my battery for? Where's my plug in on this thing? It's on this side, isn't it? Switch on my stuff here.
Oh, thank you.
It's from the train.
Oh.
It's just. we gonna take the whole time in class today?
Hmm?
We're gonna take the whole time. in
Oh,
class
no,
today? Okay.
no.
It was open.
Oh, this works.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And you know, I'll trip over that later on. That's okay.
How do we just not come those later in class?
Okay, I'll have you honey that. There you go. That'll make it easy for me. And then the plugs on the side too.
Sorry.
Plugging it in. You know, I have long fingers, so this don't work well. Is it getting away with everything?
Or look all over.
Yeah, my heart is boring, but it's all-
Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Can everybody see the slide? It says AP2 Lab Endocrine System. Okay, good. Now comes the hard part when I go to the next slide. So, well, I'll go to that in a second. AP2 Lab, nothing different than like we had in AP1. Other than the fact that there are only 3 exams in lab instead of 4. So it makes it a little easier. The schedule is posted on the bulletin board. It's posted in the course content and on the board down the other end of the hall. If you look at the schedule, I have us getting done before Thanksgiving. So because there just isn't that much to cover. However, we may have some interesting stuff to do. We may have the opportunity to dissect some beef hearts when we get into heart anatomy. We may be able to have some beef lungs and tracheas to play with too. So and those are always fun. Nothing gives you the impact by having the real stuff there in front of us. We will also use the anatomage table as we go further along, particularly on the cardiovascular system and on urinary system too. So we get a chance to play with this a little more. I want to get it connected to the computer so we can see it on the screen. So anyway. Let's see. So we have 3 exams instead of 4. We have the dates are all posted when we have our first exam. Exam 1 will cover endocrine, reproduction, and blood. Doesn't seem to make sense to have blood in there, but we'll have it in anyway. And then the second unit is going to be the heart and blood vessels and assessments. And then the third unit will be digestion. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm interrupting.
It's okay.
So I just looked at the schedule and it says for the Labor Day, I think, we
Mhm.
have classes that include lab and lecture or just lab?
Lab and lecture.
Okay.
There's nothing that day because it's a school holiday.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. So you can come here.
You just-
We won't.
nobody
I
will
won't be here.
Okay.
Nobody will be here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it doesn't hurt us too much. It doesn't hurt us on lab. I know with the Monday off for fall break and the Monday off for Labor Day that I'll be wanting those 2 days back somewhere. So, but I'm not going to get them. So we'll just have to pick up the pace. So anyway, but I do plan on getting us out of lab for the semester by the Monday before Thanksgiving. So that'll be the last lab test. Last lab test will cover the digestive system. It will cover the urinary system and it will cover respiration. So, and the advantage of doing the anatomical structures in lab is that I don't have to go over those again in lecture. So, because that's always a big time sink since we're same people, essentially. So, okay, trying to think if there's anything special to mention about lab. Now, next week we will do repro, and then we'll skip the week for Labor Day and we'll come back and do blood, and then we'll have our first exam. I think it's the middle of September.
19.
Yeah, that works out fine. It's plenty of time to get ready. And then we start getting into the really interesting stuff with the heart and lungs and stuff like that. That's I think everybody's personal favorite is getting into the heart. So anybody have any questions on anything? Yes, that's okay.
So for, you said for lecture, the exams can be in person or online, is that the same for lab?
Yes, yeah. So you can do either or, you know. It's pretty much the same content, only if it was on ground, you'd have pictures and models. Online, you'll have PowerPoints. So, okay,
Thank you.
sure. Always ask questions. It's fine. I have no issue with
Like,
that.
in person, sometimes, like, I know when we did the telescope, you'd have one like sitting out and it would be numbered.
Microscope, not telescope.
Like, okay, it's different, but it's.
If we have to have, if we do it online, or you'll make us do it online after.
I'm required to. Yeah, it's a rule.
I know you didn't make us do it last year.
I know, but we've gotten stricter. So, but it works. It works now. I'll take it in a case by case. Okay, I didn't say that. So, nothing.
Okay.
So, okay. Any questions on anything? No. Okay. So here we go. Hopefully it will. Does everybody see the next slide? Does everybody see the slide with the thyroid gland in it? And the question is, yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, good. Okay, so the first gland we're going to take a look at here is the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is found in the middle of your neck. It is shaped like a butterfly or the letter H. It is, let's see, where's my other model? Oh, no, that's, well, anyway, it, you can see on the torso model where it's located. Let me turn on the torso model camera here and stop sharing and go to the other camera. Okay. It's not letting me share my camera. Hang on a second. Now, why is it doing that? What's it looking at? This is very peculiar. My thyroid's missing. Okay, well, let's get back into the lecture and just talk about this instead. Okay, so the thyroid gland, hopefully I didn't mess anything up. Can you still all see the picture of the thyroid gland? Thyroid gland sits in the middle of the neck. In the front, it's shaped like a letter H or a butterfly. It has two wings. It has a, thank you, you had it. Thank you. Turn my back for 1 minute. Okay. So, okay. Thyroid gland. It produces thyroid hormone. It has two large lobes and a structure called the isthmus in the middle, and it makes a protein called thyroglobulin. The thyroid gland produces something known as thyroglobulin. Now, that's not thyroid hormone, but the thyroid globulin combines with iodine, plain ordinary iodine, table salt variety iodine, and that forms thyroid hormone. The thyroid can't make thyroid hormone unless there's iodine present in the diet. And whether it comes in naturally, from like in the water, or from eating fish, particularly saltwater fish, or it comes in from salt added into our food, because salt is iodized. Iodine has been added to salt for probably 100 years, because prior to iodizing salt, there was a huge thyroid deficiency problem in the US. It went away as soon as we started adding iodine to the salt, because everybody uses salt in one form or another. Anyway, thyroid hormone is made of this colloid thyroid globulin and iodine, and that's what gets stored inside the thyroid gland. Now, the other hormone that the thyroid gland produces is called calcitonin. You probably remember calcitonin from AP1 when we talked about bones. Calcitonin stimulates bone deposition. When if calcium levels rise, the thyroid gland releases calcitonin, and that causes us to lay down more bone. So, okay. This is what the thyroid gland looks like in your neck. If you're looking at it on the image on the left, you can see it sits right below the the thyroid cartilage. If you stick your finger in your neck gently, and you find the little dimple in your neck, there's a little dimple right above the thyroid cartilage. The thyroid gland is right below that. So it's not very big. Now, what does it look like microscopically? If you look at the image on the right-hand side, it has follicles and follicle cells. Now, the follicles contain something called colloid. Colloid is the thyroid globulin combined with iodine. It's the thyroid globulin, which is thyroid globulin and iodine make the colloid. That's the precursor for thyroid hormone. Now, the follicle cells, the follicles are those big pink bubbles, large pink structures where it says follicle. The cells that surround that make the thyroid globulin that's going to get combined with the iodine. And then it gets stored together as colloid, which is the precursor. Now, the follicle cells surround the follicle. Now, there's another cluster of cells that are called the parafollicular cells. And the parafollicular cells are these clusters of cells in the corners. If you imagine that there are corners there, see where you have, the follicle cells surround the bubble. The cells that fill up all the other spaces are the parafollicular cells. They're the ones that produce calcitonin that will stimulate bone production if our calcium levels get too high. So, okay, so this is what these follicles look like. This is the thyroid gland. That's a follicle. It's a storage area. That's all it is. It's a storage area. The thyroid globulin is in the follicle. It's made by the follicle cells like these. That's what they do. That's all they do is they make thyroid globulin. And when it combines with iodine, it forms the colloid, which is going to become our thyroid hormone. If there isn't enough iodine, we don't make the colloid. If there isn't enough iodine, the thyroid will continue to make the thyroid globulin, but it won't make the colloid. So if you have a patient with a deficiency in iodine, their thyroid gland will tend to get very large. It's a structure known as a goiter, and it will enlarge and enlarge. And in lecture, I have some very massive pictures to show you of this, because the thyroid gland doesn't know that there isn't any iodine. The thyroid gland is getting signals from the pituitary, from generating, the hypothalamus is saying, hey, we're not getting any thyroid hormone, and keeps telling the pituitary gland to secrete thyroid stimulating hormone. So the thyroid gets busy and the follicle cells generate lots of thyroid globulin, but there's no iodine. And so they keep getting told to make more thyroid hormone, but there isn't any iodine. And so the follicle cells keep churning out thyroid globulin, and the thyroid starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And you can have a massive enlarged thyroid, in some cases the size of a football or bigger underneath the chin in here. So, because the thyroid gland doesn't know that there's no iodine.
Can they do anything to make it go back to its normal size?
Yeah, get some iodine, and it'll shrink. So that's all you need. It was quite the health, thyroid deficiency was quite the health issue for the longest time in the United States, until they started to very simple solution. What does nearly everybody use in their diet? Salt. Add iodine to the salt. People that can't take salt can still take iodine supplements. So, do you ever notice sea salt? You ever go to a restaurant and they have sea salt there? In most cases, the sea salt doesn't have iodine. There's usually a label on the bottle that says not a source of dietary iodine. So, and yet marine fish are a great source of iodine. Who knew? So, okay. So, and there are the parafollicular cells, the clusters of cells around the follicles that have nothing to do with thyroid globulin, but have everything to do with calcitonin. If our calcium levels go up too high, we will release calcitonin and stimulate bone production. Now, in AP1, we were sort of presented that as, well, calcitonin and parathyroid hormone are antagonistic and they work against each other. And they do technically. But I'll tell you that in our bodies, we are very rarely ever going to be in a condition where we have too much calcium. So calcitonin doesn't get to play very often. So unless you have a patient who is taking excessive amounts of calcium supplements, calcitonin is not going to be involved, because our normal body condition is to be usually a little bit low on our calcium, because we usually end up wanting to break down bone to release the calcium that we need. Now, the parathyroid glands are going to help us with that. If our calcium levels are low, which they usually are going to be, the parathyroid glands come into play. There are 4 glands on the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. They're all about the size and shape of a raisin, that's about the right size. And they produce parathyroid hormone, and parathyroid hormone will stimulate bone breakdown to keep our calcium levels up. So we have we break down bone, we stimulate the osteoclasts to break down the bone, we release the calcium into the blood because we need calcium for muscle contractions, we need calcium for nerve impulses, our heart needs calcium to contract properly. One thing we'll discuss in lecture is that the heart doesn't use sodium. Like, most cells use sodium and potassium for action potentials. The heart uses calcium and potassium. And so we need calcium. There's another place where we're going to need calcium. But it doesn't matter that we break down bone to get calcium, because we're always taking calcium in our diet. We're always getting it in our food, hopefully always getting it in our food. Yeah, the only time, there would be, I'm sure there are plenty of examples of people that have a calcium-free diet or are low in calcium. So, and it can happen. But the parathyroid hormone's role is to break down bone, to help remodel our bone, if you will. And so that's what it does. Now, yes.
Okay, why are there sometimes like you hear where you get blood work and they check your thyroid?
Mhm.
Why does it come back that you have a thyroid issue? Like it hides,
You mean like it's high or it's low or?
like it hides itself if you have a thyroid issue sometimes.
Usually, you know, one of the things about, did you ever have any follow-up on it? Right.
I haven't had that, or I think I have a thyroid issue,
Mhm.
but mom says.
I think what happens is that those ranges are so specific. You know, you go get your blood work done and you see you're out of range by like a 1/100th of a point, like, but you're out of range, you know, or you're excessive by 1/100th of a point because you're out of range. Now, when we're talking deficiencies or excess, usually we're talking numbers that are really elevated or really depressed, not just if it's just little change. I don't think it matters too much.
I have a friend who her kid for a while, and then she went and seen a doctor about it.
I think it depends on, you know, what your doctor's going to get excited over as far as what numbers are going to create, you know, because yes, they're marked high or low, but I think there's, you know, I think there's you got to have some sort of significant jump or, you know, depression to really see a level of concern. Because remember that blood work is a snapshot of that point in time. You know, it isn't, you know, what if you forgot you're having blood work done and you had 3 donuts and your blood glucose is going to elevated, you know? Is that going to create a red flag? Well, temporarily it'll be a red flag. There, your blood glucose is like 5 million, like 150 instead of being 70 because you had 3 donuts. On the other hand, if you remembered that you had a blood test and your blood work comes back as your blood glucose level is like 80, that's normal. That's a nice number. The only thing wrong with blood work is it is just a snapshot of a single point in time. You'd have to have some more continuous monitoring, I think, to detect that. There's a lot of other tests that you would have to have done too. So. Did that answer your question? Okay, so now, okay, so this is the back side, the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. And you can see, here's the back of the throat up above the pharynx, and you can see the 2 lobules of the thyroid gland. The parathyroid glands, there are 4 of them embedded on the posterior surface, and they really are about the size and shape of a raisin. And then they're on either side of the esophagus. You can see where the esophagus and the trachea are there. Now, if you look at them in cross section, they are embedded right in the middle of the thyroid gland, and they look distinctively different. If you look at the slide here, I think this might be a better slide. There we go. Here we see thyroid tissue on either side of the parathyroid gland. This is the whole gland right here. And so you see a different type of cellular structure inside the parathyroid gland. Over here on either side of it, you see the colloids and the follicular cells and the parafollicular cells. There's your thyroid gland, the same on the other side. What we have inside the parathyroid gland are what are called the chief cells. So it's distinctively different. You know, in the thyroid gland, you can see the follicle, you can see the parafollicular cells, like over on the side here. You can see the cluster of the parafolliculars, and then around each of these purple colloids, you can see the follicular cells. But if you go into the middle of the picture, the parathyroid gland filled with these chief cells that are going to produce parathyroid hormone. So pretty distinctively different in appearance and in their function too. Okay. Questions on the parathyroid and the thyroid gland? Okay, The pancreas. Pancreas is a tadpole-shaped structure that is found underneath the stomach on the left-hand side. You can see in this illustration here, the stomach was on top of the structure here. And you see the pancreas now. The pancreas is very, very squishy. You know, it does not have a rigid structure or shape at all. But the pancreas is both an endocrine and an exocrine gland. Now, what you see here is this white structure in the middle is the pancreatic duct. The pancreatic duct dumps into the small intestine down here at what's known as the duodenum. That's that little curved structure over here on the side. And the pancreatic duct contains pancreatic enzymes designed to break down protein. So half of what the pancreas does is secrete pancreatic enzymes to break down protein. The other half of what it does is release glucagon or insulin to either raise or lower blood glucose levels. So we have a separate, distinct structure inside the pancreas for that. Within the pancreas, we have what's known as the islets of Langerhans. The islets of Langerhans are clusters of cells that are found throughout the pancreas that produce glucagon or produce insulin. There are two types of cells in the islets of Langerhans, or what are known as the alpha cells, which secrete glucagon, and the beta cells, which release insulin. And this is what they look like. You can't look at a model of a pancreas and say, oh, there's an alpha cell or there's a beta. No. But microscopically, you can see the clusters of cells here, the islets of Langerhans. They stain differently, they appear differently. The rest of all these cells here are called Acini cells. These dark stained purple cells are going to be producing the pancreatic enzymes that get down the pancreatic duct. The islets of Langerhans are going to release hormones that are going to be discharged right into the blood supply. They're going to either make glucagon or they're going to make insulin. The dark staining cells are the beta cells. The light staining cells are the alpha cells. The alpha cells make the glucagon. See, there's the islets of Langerhans. Out here are the Acini cells that make the digestive enzymes. And here we see these are beta cells, and the clear staining ones are the alpha cells. It is the beta cells, if the beta cells are destroyed, if the beta cells fail to function, that's the root cause of diabetes mellitus type 1 diabetes. You know, the juvenile diabetes, type 1 diabetes, whatever you want to call it. It is if the beta cells are destroyed. In type 2 diabetes, the beta cells are functioning just fine, but the insulin's not being recognized. So the beta cells are destroyed in type 1, and they're not producing any more insulin. So we have these two different types of structures in here. We have the islets of Langerhans, and we have the Acini cells. We'll come back to the Acini cells when we look at digestion towards the end of the semester, but because it is the pancreatic enzymes which break down the last of the protein that comes through from the stomach. So, okay. And, you know, this is one of those slides that really hard to decipher, but that structure right there is the islet of Langerhans. There are lots of them throughout here, you know. So and you can sort of tell which ones are which, but you know, as long as, you know, the questions are always going to be identify the islet of Langerhans and which cells fail to produce insulin. Well, it's always going to be the beta cells. So, and this model, I'll pass this around here. It's the same one that everybody saw in the picture. But this shows you the size, this is sort of real size. And it shows you the duct. You'll get to see this all again in, later when we get into digestion. But half of what the pancreas does is all about digesting protein. It dumps the digestive enzymes right into the small intestine there at the end, mixes it with bile from the gallbladder. The bile breaks up chops up the last of the fat. So a lot of what the pancreas does is all about digestion. So there are the Acini cells, and there's the outer Langerhans. So now our pituitary gland is the master gland of the body. Pituitary gland is the master gland of the body. It sits directly underneath the cerebral hemispheres, and it has an anterior and a posterior region. Now, in this slightly enlarged brain, I'm passing around. There's the pituitary gland right there at the top. Remember, from AP1, our brain is about it's about the size of our fist. So, okay, so here we see a cross section of a pituitary gland. We have what's known as the neurohypophysis and the adenohypophysis. The neurohypophysis is the posterior region of the pituitary gland. The adenohypophysis is the anterior region. The neurohypophysis is all about storage. And you can look at a slide and tell which one is which simply by looking at the color. The neurohypophysis, the posterior pituitary, stains light. It's light colored because it's only storage. It doesn't have any secretory cells. It doesn't do anything except store antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Those are made in the hypothalamus. So the neurohypophysis, when it stains like this, will always stain light. The posterior pituitary is lighter than the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is secretory, so it stains dark. Lots of secretory cells there to produce the 6 different hormones that we need to see. So even here, if we look at this, if this is a cross section of the pituitary gland, which side is the lighter side? The left-hand side, correct? Yes, that is the secretory side. Right there, that's the neurohypophysis or the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary or the adenohypophysis is the darker side. It's dark because it contains secretory cells. So that's how we tell them apart. This isn't rocket surgery or brain science. Well, I guess it is brain science. So, okay. Now, the neurohypophysis is only a storage facility for oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. That's all it is. Yeah. And so we release those when the hypothalamus tells the pituitary gland to release those, it releases it. But the hypothalamus makes the oxytocin. It makes the antidiuretic hormone. Makes perfect sense too, because the hypothalamus is monitoring our salt levels. So the adenohypophysis is also under control of the hypothalamus, but it's going to make hormones in there. Now everybody should have a model in front of them of the adrenal glands and the kidneys. Our kidneys are really tiny. If you consider our adrenal gland here, the adrenal gland, the kidney will fit in the palm of your hand. You know, many people have the impression, many people have two views about the kidney. One, that their kidneys are down right above their hip, and they aren't. The kidneys are right underneath the ribs. And second, that they're massive. Each kidney could fit in your hand very easily. This is a life-size kidney, which means that's a life-size adrenal gland on top of it. The adrenal gland is this little pyramid-shaped structure, and it produces 3 different types of hormones from its outer layer, the cortex, and epinephrine and norepinephrine from its medulla, the inner layer. And it has nothing to do with the kidney proper. It just sits there on top. So for your perspective, that's where your kidneys are located. If you look at the torso model, you can see right here, there's a kidney, and the 2 adrenal glands sitting on top of that. So here's our adrenal gland. The cortex, the outer layer, and we're going to use the term cortex and medulla a lot in various organs in AP2, both in lecture and lab. The outer layer of the adrenal gland is called the cortex, and it has 3 distinct sublayers within it. And each sublayer produces a different type of hormone. Now, these are all what we call corticosteroids. You heard the term corticosteroid in the past, probably. A corticosteroid is a steroid hormone that is made in the adrenal cortex, in the outer covering of the adrenal gland. So like any of the different types, like cortisol or cortisone. You ever heard of cortisone? Cortisone comes from the adrenal cortex. Synthetic cortisone doesn't, but the adrenal cortex secretes its own version of cortisol or cortisone in here. So anytime we have the term corticosteroid or cortico something, it's in reference to the outer covering of the adrenal gland. So there are 3 layers within the adrenal cortex. We have what's known as the zona glomerulosa, the zona fasciculata, and the zona reticularis. Now, and the cortex itself is covered by a tough layer called the capsule. It's connective tissue. Now, how do you tell where all these layers are? Well, the capsule is very easy to identify. If you look at the picture on the screen, the capsule is at the very top of the slide in the illustration. It doesn't look like any other layer there. Now, the first layer directly underneath the capsule is the zona glomerulosa. You could argue that that's the most important layer, but all 3 of them are pretty important. So we have the zona glomerulosa. Zona glomerulosa produces what are known as mineral corticoids that regulate. They also help to regulate our fluid levels. We know that antidiuretic hormone does that, but so does the mineral corticoids coming out of the zona glomerulosa. The zona fasciculata helps to regulate our glucose levels. Yes, we have insulin to do that, but we also use the cortisone and the cortisols that are produced in the zona fasciculata. The zona reticularis, excuse me, is unlike everything else. The zona reticularis produces androgens. Androgens are essentially the non-specific sex hormones. It's essentially testosterone. In males, it stays testosterone. In females, it's converted in the ovary into estrogen because their chemical structure is very similar. The zona reticularis is what triggers the onset of puberty. It causes the development, it triggers the production of estrogen or testosterone as your pubescent patient is going through the growth spurts and the sexual development and stuff like that. All taken care of in here. The zona reticularis will also stimulate the sex drive. The zona reticularis will also help to moderate the lack of estrogen in your postmenopausal female. Once the ovaries have shut down, the zona reticularis will continue to produce estrogen for testosterone, which will become estrogen in the postmenopausal female. And we'll see when we get into reproduction that in the female sexual response, your postmenopausal female is often more sexually aroused after menopause, thanks to the release of these hormones from the zona reticularis. And lots of patients come in and say, is there something wrong with me? Because she has desires she hasn't had for 20 years, or whatever. And it's perfectly normal. It's all about the zona reticularis taking over when the estrogen levels have finally dropped off. So, point to remember when you're having a discussion with a patient. So, now below the zona reticularis is the medulla. So the term cortex and medulla, we're going to hear this term again and again as we go through these various organs. The medulla has nothing to do with the cortex. The medulla is connected to the nervous system, and the medulla is where epinephrine and norepinephrine get released. So they are under direct nervous control. That's where our epinephrine and norepinephrine come from in our fight or flight response, right there. And what's important to remember, if you can remember the order of the names, that will be good. Zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis. If you can remember that glomerulosa is under the capsule and reticularis is above the medulla, it should be pretty straightforward. And you'll hear me talk a lot about what they do in lab. In lecture also. There are some very peculiar things that can happen with all three of these areas as they malfunction. We see a variety of conditions that we'll talk about in lecture when they are either overproducing or underproducing. Okay. And here's a really nice picture illustration of what it looks like in cross section with the capsule. Each region stains distinctively different in here. So, and of course, each region very distinctively produces different types of hormones. Okay. And this is a very, very, very busy slide with lots of information. What I will tell you is that the zona glomerulosa, the number one hormone produced by the zona glomerulosa is something called aldosterone. Aldosterone is the trigger for most of our cases of elevated blood pressure. Aldosterone tells us to retain salt and retain water. If we retain salt and we retain water, it raises our blood volume. If it raises our blood volume, our heart has to work harder. If our heart has to work harder, we raise our blood pressure. So the zona fasciculata produces the glucocorticoids, cortisone, cortisol. They can allow us to have greater demands for glucose. And of course, the zona reticularis are the androgens. So, okay, let's move on. Now, okay, looking at the male structure, the testes, we'll look at the ovaries here in a second. The testes are the site of testosterone production and sperm production. The testes are contained inside a structure known as the scrotum. The scrotum functions as a temperature regulator. The sperm cells, when they develop, have to develop at about 5 degrees cooler than body temperature, or the enzymes in the head of the sperm aren't going to function. Those are the enzymes that help to burrow through the covering around the egg. So the reason that the testes are in the scrotum is so that they don't, they can be a little bit cooler. It's a cooling function here. So, but this is one of the functions both as an endocrine and exocrine gland. It's endocrine in the sense that it produces testosterone. It's exocrine in the sense that it produces sperm. So it has, you know, it has a duct for sperm release, but it has blood supply for the testosterone release. So now the testes are affected by two hormones from the pituitary gland, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. We'll hear all about that in lecture. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the production of egg cells in the female, and or rather the maturation of egg cells in the female and the development of sperm cells in the male. And these are developing sperm cells right in the middle here. That round structure is called a seminiferous tubule, and those little string-like structures in the middle, those are immature sperm cells. So this is the sperm production is driven by the release of follicle stimulating hormone from the pituitary gland. Luteinizing hormone stimulates the production of testosterone from these little cells out here along the edges. These are what we call the interstitial cells, and they produce testosterone. So this is why, again, the testes are both endocrine and exocrine. So because here, the testosterone that's being released is just absorbed into the blood, but here, the sperm cells are going to go through a series of tubules prior to ejaculation. So the interstitial cells of Leydig, where it says Leydig cells, they're tucked away around the edges of the seminiferous tubules. They produce the testosterone. The sperm production driven by FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, takes place in the seminiferous tubules. The Leydig cells are stimulated by what's known as luteinizing hormone. Now there's an ovary. Here is a very large ovary. Just dropped an egg. This is a very large ovary. That's a fallopian tube. That's a long tube. The ovary is filled with thousands and thousands of immature eggs. And in lecture, we'll talk about this as to whether or not, you know, conventional wisdom has always said that a female is born with all the eggs she's ever going to have. And generally it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 or 3 million eggs when she's born. And when at the onset of puberty, she has about 400,000 eggs. And every month during her reproductive years, every about 13 times a year, she'll release an egg. And so she'll release about 500 eggs, more or less, over her reproductive lifetime out of the 400,000. Conventional wisdom also said that a woman that gets pregnant at 40 got pregnant with a 40-year-old egg. It's as old as she is. Now, there have been a lot of studies that may contradict this. It may be that the ovaries are capable of producing new eggs from the epithelial cells that surround the outside of the ovary. So, you know, our conventional approach has always been that the egg gets soaked with follicle stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary, and every month an egg matures and gets ovulated and released. And if it gets impregnated, then it's, you know, you may or may not get a baby out of it. And as the woman gets older, she releases less and less eggs, and the eggs that are released are wearing out. That may not be the case. That may not be the case at all. It may be that she's still continuing to produce eggs. But anyway, this is the ovary. Ovaries are just like the testes, the ovaries are paired. Each ovary is about the size and shape of a grape. And they are attached to the uterus, but not connected to it directly. The ovary can release an egg. That egg will drift out into the abdominal cavity. The fallopian tube, that thing with the fingers like structures on there, actually are actually called the fimbriae or fingers, generate a current to draw the egg into the fallopian tube. That's that red structure on top of the picture there. There's no guarantees the egg's going to make it in there. Oops, yeah, because there at ovulation, there goes an egg right there, the secondary oocyte. No guarantees it's going to make it into this structure here. It's not a direct connection. We don't know how many times an egg gets released and may decide to go the wrong direction. No idea, because we're talking something that is microscopic. So, but every month, every 28 days actually, an egg is a secondary, an oocyte matures and gets released. Now, are they newly formed oocytes, or are they the ones that were there at conception, at childbirth, and at puberty? We're not so certain anymore that it's 100% saying, it used to be, conventional wisdom, 1 million at childbirth and 400,000 at the onset of puberty, but maybe not. So anyway, but every 28 days, a new oocyte is released. It may or may not make its way into the uterine tube. If it does make its way into the uterine tube and gets fertilized, it will make its way down to the uterus, and it might or might not implant itself. We don't know. We don't know all the things that can go wrong. We know that the success rate for successful implantation is only about 20%. And that's to come all the way to term. Okay. So, and this structure here, the corpus luteum, is what's left over after ovulation. Here this picture here on the top, it says pre-ovulatory follicle. There's an oocyte in here, that round thing. That's an egg getting ready, it's almost ready to be released. This follicle here is what we have down here. Now, the reason I mention this is because the ovary has been releasing estrogen. The corpus luteum releases a hormone called progesterone. Progesterone tells the uterine lining to stay intact. What will happen is on day 14, the female will ovulate. Whatever day she ovulates suddenly becomes day 14 in her cycle. Because from ovulation, from day 14, from ovulation day to the end of her cycle for that month is 14 days. And that's pretty much a given. So what will happen is she ovulates in day 14, the egg gets released. The leftover follicle becomes the corpus luteum. Now the egg in the meantime takes about 7 days to get down to the uterus. Now this is a 28-day cycle. She ovulates in day 14. Now the egg is up to day 21. It's got 7 more days to implant itself and get attached before menstruation starts and everything slides out. Now from day 14 on, the leftover follicle, the corpus luteum, is secreting progesterone. Progesterone tells the uterine lining to stay there. But if the egg doesn't attach, then the corpus luteum doesn't get a signal saying, hey, we're attached, and it shuts down its progesterone release. When it does that, then starting around the end of day 28, everything starts sliding out and menstruation occurs. If implantation was successful and a hormone called HCG is produced. HCG tells the corpus luteum, hey, keep making the progesterone. The lining needs to stay intact. HCG is the hormone that gets picked up in early pregnancy test kits. You know, pregnant or not pregnant, or green or yellow or blue or whatever they do, I don't know. But shows up in the urine. HCG. No HCG, no corpus luteum, no progesterone, everything slides out. HCG, then everything stays intact until the placenta takes over producing progesterone in about 3 months. You're going to hear all this in lecture anyway. So it is, as I said, it is the HCG that is detected in the early pregnancy test kits. It's also, this is also the whole basis of how birth control pills work. As long as progesterone levels are high, there will be no menstrual flow. Okay, so how does that keep a person from becoming pregnant? Well, if progesterone levels are high, the hypothalamus assumes that we're pregnant. The hypothalamus will not stimulate the release of another egg if she thinks the female's pregnant. So birth control pills function by fooling the hypothalamus into thinking that a pregnancy is taking place. High progesterone levels occur so that there is no another egg being released. So yeah.
Is this with all birth control?
Yeah, they all work. The pills work that way. Now I don't know. You know, the IUD works by irritating the lining. So, but if it's
What about the shot?
if it's hormone based at all, then it's going to be stimulating the progesterone production. So
Yes, shot.
yeah. So
I took that for 4 years.
I didn't know that existed.
so now, and we'll talk a lot more about all that in lecture. So don't worry about that right now. Just, you know, okay. This is what the corpus luteum looks like. It that large brown structure there is secreting progesterone. Was secreting progesterone. Of course, my question, I've always wondered when I see this picture, why'd they take this out? You know, so because during pregnancy, this is going to be working for 3 months to keep the lining intact. Okay, yeah. It's all secretory glands, secrete lots of progesterone. Okay, and this is the thymus gland. Thymus gland is a little structure that sits in what we call the mediastinum, in the middle of our chest. When we were infants, it was very large. This is where T cells, and there are 2 types of white cells, T cells and B cells. The T cells go to the thymus gland. That's why they call them T cells. And they become what's known as immunocompetent. They become infection fighters. And the thymus gland trains them up so they can identify foreign substances and kill them. The other cells, the B cells, become immunocompetent in the bone marrow. And that's what makes our antibodies. We fight infections either through killing things with the T cells or generating antibodies to block the pathogen with our B cells. They work together to protect us. And there isn't much to see about the thymus gland because when we were infants, it was very big in the first year of life, and then it shrank down to nothing. So because we don't need it anymore. T cells have the ability to maintain that immunocompetence as they grow and undergo mitosis and cell division. So, and you can see it's highly secretory. So, and that is the anatomy of what we think is important on the endocrine system. Any questions? I know, go ahead. I was waiting. So
Yes, so I know for AP1, at least for my class, all we had like grade-wise was the exams. Is it the same with this one?
same in here, just the exams.
Okay.
Only The good news is there are only 3 exams instead of 4, so. No bone exams, no muscle exams, so, yeah, yeah. Hey, thanks. Who did you have for AP1?
I had 2 professors. I took it online over the summer. I had Miss Rich for lecture.
Oh, okay.
And then I had Dr. Dixon for lab.
Oh, you, two good instructors, yeah.
Yeah, it was confusing because like I'm so much more used to Respondus than honor walk, and Miss Rich used Respondus, but Dr. Dixon used honor walk, and I'm like, gotta pick one.
Yeah, I'm using Respondus, so.
I have really bad testing personally, and having to see like myself in honor walk, because it shows you yourself as you're taking the test, it just stresses me out.
Oh, I bet it would, yeah, so. Okay, if there's no other, if there are any questions, feel free, otherwise, we're done. Yes,
My brother has this thing called athlete's heart.
okay, so, go ahead.
Athlete's heart, and we explain it a little bit more. Like a thing of the heart.
Is his heart enlarged or? That one I want to write down. No, I'll take care of that, so.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too. So athlete's heart, is his heart enlarged or is it?
It's the walls of his heart.
Okay,
And he plays football. He lives with my dad. But me and my little brother live up here with my mom. And me and my mom are in Bass Pro. And one
Okay.
of the team lead's sons died from the same symptoms Tristan's having. And